on the theme of making videos, just quantity. Quality is going to be shit. It's all about the quantity right now. So hey, just make more videos, right? The lighting's terrible because the sun is behind me. I could do some backward walking, but it feels like I'm just going to trip over. The terrain here is kind of bumpy, and so it's not like the best idea. One of the things that I've wanted to organize my thoughts about in an attempt to then be able to present it in a sort of more structured and formal way are the things that I've learned and the knowledge that I have, even if it's only superficial knowledge, but on a wide range of subjects within what is the permaculture world and natural building. Now, by no means I'm a natural builder, by no means I'm a permaculturist in the agricultural sense. You could argue that permaculture spans more than that. It's more of a system. See, even the definition of permaculture is kind of a bit not something that I could say off the top of my head. However, I have been exposed to a bunch of stuff within those two worlds, that of permaculture and that of natural building, and therefore I want to organize my thoughts around that so that I can structure a presentation. I guess natural building falls under permaculture, and I'll have to look it up in terms of what is permaculture and the exact definition and why that makes sense. But for now, let's just go with that. I know very little. I'm assuming that you don't know anything. Imaginary person. So anything I explain is at least going to be building up on the knowledge that is zero on the subject. So within the realm of natural building, there's so many things that we can focus on. There's the materials themselves. I guess, what is natural building? That's a good place to start. Natural building, as the way it sounds, is building in a natural way. What does a natural way mean? It means using natural materials. What are natural materials? In this case, often they're materials that are sourced locally, and ones that make sense with the environment that they're in. So, for example, you could build in the desert, you could build out of sandbags. Basically, as it sounds, bags filled with sands, and you can pile these on top of each other, make domes, make walls, a bunch of different structures. And because you're in the desert and you have a bunch of sand, your entry, it just makes sense. And the material makes sense as well. So it's not only just cheaper materials because it's sourced locally. It makes sense because the type of material in a certain environment has a purpose. It's made for that environment. So if you then make something out of that material, oftentimes makes more sense. So in the sandbag example, you can build these thick walls really cheap out of a very dense insulating material, which keeps the cool in and the heat out, which is what you want. It also means that in the night, when it's really cold outside, it will retain the temperature inside and not drop considerably. Now, imagine if you built a house out of wood in the desert. You have to heat that at night, depending on the temperature drop. You have to keep it cool, AC running constantly. So that's just an example. And the way that natural building is structured, there's... I lost the car. Oh, there it is. The way that natural building is structured is that in different zones, I think the zoning concept comes from agriculture. So it divides the world basically into different zones and then subzones from that, which indicate the type of climate that it has or subclimate. One sec. Dog's about to do a runner. Vin! I wonder if climates and subclimates, and it sort of structures the zone based on that. So then natural building works on top of that as well, or can work on top of that zoning convention, in which, okay, I'm just making these up, but zone 5, this would be good to have written down, which I would in the future. Zone 5, let's say, is desert. Go back to the desert example. Zone 5 is desert. These are the type of materials that are often available. These are the sort of factors to take in terms of what a house in that environment would need and how those two combine. So we could also go to a temperate climate. In temperate climate, maybe in the area that you live, there's, a lot more access to foliage. There's often, or there can be, more clay soils. So if you have quite clay soil and access to foliage, you can do a straw bale house. I don't actually know if straw bales are good for temperate climate. Again, need to look up the details of this. But that's an example as well. Now the thing, why this is a good example, I think, is because in temperate climates you get rain. And, just clay and straw and foliage mixed together is not going to give you, when it gets hit by the rain, it's not going to protect itself. It's going to eventually degrade and fall apart. So what do we want? We want some sort of roofing, and that's when often the combined materials of having a long pitch or a wide pitch and a good overhang pitch for the roof in order to protect it. Now in this case, all I'm talking about is materials. We haven't even talked about concepts yet. And in the natural building sort of design phase, there's a lot of concepts that you need to take into consideration as well. Concepts like, lighting. And this, I guess, is taken into consideration in architecture, sometimes more than others. I mean, if you think about a building that is designed in a studio and built in a studio almost, and then just plump somewhere, sometimes they're not taking into consideration the lighting, the wind, all these other factors, and how that will affect the building itself. A tree will have thicker bark on the colder side. That's what we want to sort of mimic when we build. We want to protect the colder side. We want to have natural lighting come into the house so that it warms it up, but then also build in a way, in a structure, that means that we can retain that heat. And these are the concepts that we can look at in terms of design elements. If we sort of zoom out a little bit, that's really only talking about the design of a specific structure. But if we zoom out a little bit, we can think about, okay, how are we designing multiple structures and how they interact with each other? And this is where sort of permaculture comes into play a little more, because they have their own zoning convention, in which zone 0 is the things that are the most important. And as you zone out, normally to around 5, they're the things that you maybe wouldn't visit as much. So zone 0 tends to be the house, let's say. But you can divide anything into, like even the house itself, you can divide into zones 0 to 5. But in a bigger sense, let's say that zone 0 is the house. And then from there, zone 1 is like your immediate outdoor garden that you go to and you probably go to every day, let's say. Or the shed, if it's a regularly visited shed. Now imagine you've got a wood shed, maybe a little bit further away. That could be zone 2 maybe. You don't go there every day, but you don't want it 5 miles down the road. And then gradually, I think it can be a little bit, it's not strict, it has to be this or it has to be that. And then number 5 tends to be what we leave to nature. So let nature be nature. You want to leave zones that you don't touch. Sure, maybe we can take care of it in some ways, but it's really meant to be there so that we don't interact with it, so that we let nature do its thing, which is something that I really like as well. Sort of making space for nature and taking care of the rest.